I'll be asking about a range of other possible things. So this is just to show how much sexual, the issue of sexual identity and sexual orientation has been pressed upon us, how we think of things. Alright, so I don't know if you have done a little reading on postmodernism and post-structuralism, but if you have, you would realize, even if you've done even just a little, you would realize that all that I've been saying about what Sedgwick is saying seems to sound very post-structuralist in terms of challenging objectivity and challenging absolute truth and saying that things don't always have to be this particular way. We can't explain things in terms of this particular thing. It's a very complicated thing, and bringing in things like relativity and things like that. So it's very post-structuralist, and when we think about things like this, one of the things that immediately would probably run into your mind if you are familiar with the theory is queer theory. And the reason for that is because Sedgwick, who basically was one of the key founders of gender studies, queer studies, and you understand that queer theory and queer studies, the nature of it and complexity of it, if you understand that, then you would understand a little bit more what homosociality is about, because it is the same woman writing about the same kind of thing. And you would understand that if queer theory takes this particular stance, this is the same person writing about this thing, it kind of helps us understand homosociality a little bit better, even though they are different in many ways. But what I have here is a little video. I'm going to play it.
Put the cursor over it, right?
Alright, so what I wanted to do is to fast forward, but I don't know how to do that. So, my tech.
No, hold it. You gotta hold it down. There you go.
I want to bring it down to about 3 minutes.
Queer theory is designed in part to give us a robust and self-aware
If it can't, we'll just watch the whole thing. Alright, so while this is starting up, I'll just make a little disclaimer here that the part of this that I really wanted us to pay attention to is what this gentleman is saying about Michel Foucault and what he has to say about issues of sexuality.
designed in
Because Sedgwick
part
was a lot
to give
from
us a robust and self-aware language with which to unsaddle the putatively solid bonds that join chromosomal sex to gender to sexuality.
And when you mention heterosexuality as the norm in culture, why do you think that is?
It's hard to know. It's one of the things that the sort of founders of queer theory in the 1980s and 1990s, remember that queer theory as a discipline, a university discipline, is still relatively young. And that individuals, the thinkers and activists who created queer theory at the beginning were all very interested in how it is that heteronormativity and normalization, the ferocious and repeated normalization of heterosexual life, how did that come to be? It's very difficult to say. We know that it did come into a kind of force at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. So it has a kind of beginning that coincides roughly with a number of other changes characterizing the modern world. So that heteronormativity, the normalization of heterosexual life, as we understand it, is a relatively recent phenomenon. And historians of culture, historians of sexuality have demonstrated that you can go back to the mid-18th century, but before that you're really describing a very different kind of terrain. So it's a relatively new phenomenon.
Some of the complexities you did mention, the in-betweens of gay, lesbian, transgendered. Can you maybe give an example of those complexities within themselves and their identity?
Gay life gay life is reflected by all sorts of things. It isn't simply a question of sexual interest or object choice, as it's sometimes called, as if it were a choice. Sexuality can be inflected by your class, by your ethnicity. In other words, that How to Be Gay, which is the title of a very interesting book right now, just recently published. The answer to that question is there's lots of ways of being gay. No single way of being gay. And thank goodness for that. And I think one of the great things about queer theory is that it helps all of us, gay or not, to understand just how complicated, how wonderfully complicated gay life is. And Michel Foucault, said that we live in an age, one of the characteristics of modernity, of the modern age, is that we put such unusual emphasis on the answer to those questions. Are you a man or a woman? Are you straight or gay? And as Foucault pointed out, that's a relatively recent obsession. One doesn't have to go very far back into European culture to see that in earlier ages, going back to Latin and classical antiquity, for example, those weren't the ways in which people identified themselves in very different ways, rather than simply answering the question, what are you, meaning, are you gay or straight? Are you a man or a woman? I think these ideas have the kind of hold on us that they do because they are abstractions. And Michel Foucault helped us understand that abstractions have an unusual power over us. What he called regulatory ideals. So the ideal, any given culture's ideal of what it is to be feminine or masculine, for example, those ideals are circulating in the culture, and we're expected to mimic or act out, as it were, those ideals. Let's take the example of gay marriage. Wonderful. Everyone should be allowed to be married, of course. It seems to me absolutely absurd and sickening in its own way, from my point of view, that anyone could object to anyone marrying anyone else. It just boggles the mind that there could be such things. But as some queer theorists have pointed out, there's a certain way in which the insistence on gay marriage is a kind of heterosexual colonization of queer life, which is to say that marriage is to a certain extent a heteronormative phenomenon, closely linked to heteronormativity. It's so important when you teach a course in queer theory and critical practice never to inadvertently teach the class as if somehow queers were elsewhere, as if somehow the teacher standing in front of them wasn't queer, as if somehow the student sitting next to you wasn't queer. It's so important to teach a class and encourage everyone in that class to realize that this is not a theoretical abstraction. We're not talking about human beings that you read about in the newspaper. We're talking about real people and the people that are in the course, fellow students. And it's really important for students, queers and non-queers alike, to see that within any given classroom, there's all different ways of being human, all different ways of living a desirous life. We just need a much better vocabulary with which to understand how complicated that life is.
Okay, so is it a little bit clearer now, the train of thought that Sedgwick is kind of ruling on in terms of how she conceptualizes sexuality and gender and things like that? A little bit clearer? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Okay. Alright, so my friends would know this about me. I love PowerPoint making. I love to just, when I'm presenting, I just love to get all fancy with the PowerPoints, and it's just all fun to me. And when I first decided that I wanted to do this topic on homosociality, the first thing that popped into my head was to show you guys a little diagram of my little homosocial circle. So some of these faces you will recognize, some you may not. So these are my very close friends. And so this is my homosocial circle. And I was very excited to bring this diagram and to show it to y'all. And then in preparing it hit me that if Sedgwick was here in this class right now, what she would say to me is that the reason why I as a woman would be so excited and so feel so free and open to share this with you all is because I am a woman. Because for